Welcome to the webinar, everyone. Today we're going to talk about some research that we've recently published around our view of the direction that operational and non-financial risk management is going in. The report itself is called Right Time, Right Place, the Drive for Change in Operational and Non-Financial Risk. And today I'm going to try and present some of the headlines of that in a fairly short way. Hopefully that will give you a flavour of the research itself. And if you're interested in finding out more, then you can go and read the full report. The first question you should always ask when you set out to do some research is really why. What's prompting the need to research a particular topic? And we saw that there was an opportunity, probably like never before, for operational and non-financial risks to step up and really make a difference. That has been a long-term ambition for many people, but it's really been an ambition rather than a reality. There were always things blocking operational risk, creating value, not just protecting value. But there are several factors coinciding today that make that much more of a reality than ever before. The first is the need. There is this relentless push towards digital transformation. It's creating a much more complex risk landscape for operational risk to manage. So there's a real need and an opportunity there to make a difference. The second is technology as well, but really technology used to help manage risk. So better automation and analytics is really supporting that effort. There is a renewed or a new focus on resiliency and customer centricity. That's really coming from the regulators, but also has been embraced by the industry as well. Putting customers at the center of everything means that people are thinking far more about resilience than they previously have. And finally, the other thing that's coincided with all of this is the pandemic itself. And that provided an opportunity for operational risk to step up and make a difference, demonstrated that really they can contribute, not just in times of crisis, but in normal times as well. So I guess in summary, the pace of change is dramatic. It really requires a strong risk function to make sure that that we manage that change well and we avoid harm as well. But really stressing there is this opportunity to also create value. So what does our new report explore? 4 points really. The first is how the financial services industry is evolving. That's really looking at evolution in terms of the new risks that brings to operational risk. The second point follows on from that directly, and what are those new risks? What are the challenges that they will cause, operational and non-financial risk? Third point really, what opportunities that new landscape brings to ONFR teams. And then finally, the point that we referred to right at the start is what can we do to really maximize the value that we deliver to our institutions? All of this content in the report is all informed by endless discussions that we've had over the last year with our senior group of leaders at ORX, which is called Leaders Connect. Next question, what are the main conclusions of the report? Two huge headlines really. We saw that operational risk is responding to digital transformation and the other challenges we see with these kind of two interlinked strategies. The first we label as optimization. And the idea there is that risk teams are trying to do what they do currently, but better. So optimizing their performance, work more efficiently, reduce the burden that they place on others. And that's a really crucial point. Traditionally, second line operational risk teams have placed a lot of burden on others in their institution, particularly in the first line, to give them data, to collate things, to do risk assessment. So trying to reduce that burden, make the whole thing much more efficient. And really, we see that as the kind of bare minimum. Without doing that, you're really not going to kind of keep up with the way that things are moving. But there is an awful lot more you can do. And if you don't do more, you probably won't remain resilient during this period of intense change. So the second set of things that people are doing, we've kind of labeled active risk management. And that means getting far more involved in how things are changing. This is really the stuff that the more ambitious institutions are doing, those who are keen to turn ONFR into a function that allows safe change, and also kind of maximising the value of those changes. So back to that first question, how is digital transformation changing risk management? As we all know, finance is becoming increasingly digital, all aspects of it across institutions. This is resulting in changes to business models and operating models, and both of those things usually point to changing operational risk profiles. The challenge we have really is the rate at which things are changing. Means that the kind of traditional ways that we may manage operational risk probably won't keep up with the rate of change of those risk profiles. So really, to remain relevant, we need to adapt, we need to support the speed of change, but also understand those new vulnerabilities so that change can happen safely. So at the bottom of this slide, we've got a fairly simplistic view of what the old world of operational risk may have looked like. Causes were slow, simple, familiar. Events were kind of siloed on the whole, so they didn't necessarily spread across different risks. People tended to think about financial impacts as their main focus, and we managed that by largely being manual, periodic, retrospective. So we did assessments quarterly, annually, depending on what thing you're talking about, for example. In the new world, because of that rapid rate of change, things are moving more quickly. Causes are much faster, complex, ambiguous. Events can be a lot more interconnected than they were. That's partly to do with the way that things are far more interconnected in finance than they were maybe 10 years ago. The impacts are broader, so financial impact is still a huge concern, but reputational impacts are of concern as well. Resilience is something that people are hugely focusing on at the moment. And how do you manage any of that? The methods change, so things become more automated. You need more real-time understanding of what's going on. And you want to really get ahead of things as well. So rather than being retrospective, you want to be preemptive. We asked a question to that senior leadership group that I referred to earlier about really what they were doing. And it was a fairly open question, which we then bucketed into these two themes of optimized and active. So the kind of things that people were saying that went into that optimized theme were, as I've mentioned before, reducing the burden was a big message. And that was in two areas: reducing the burden on the first line. That means simplifying what you're asking them to do, standardizing more, coordinating more, embedding the risk management into day-to-day activities, so it doesn't feel like it's an extra thing that you do at the end of your BAU. So that's reducing the burden on the first line, and then there are a lot of effort going into reducing the burden on the second line. So that's where you see more use of automation, more use of data, cutting out manual steps, allowing the second line oversight to operate in a far more automated way than it previously has. So that's the optimized theme. The active theme is quite different. That's about trying to be more fast, dynamic, respond more, be more agile. As a consequence, risk teams are trying to build senior level relationships which allow those things to happen. They are building technical knowledge, particularly in the most material risks, bringing skills and tool sets, helping the first line manage things in a much more active way. And a big part of that is using external information as well. So bringing in information, horizon scanning particularly, to allow those first line projects and change, particularly to change in the most effective way. So that's what people said they were doing. And from that, we inferred a kind of slightly new purpose for operational risk, which is what we've got underneath on this slide. That optimized focus is around providing that robust assurance. It's also around providing a flexible and dynamic view of risk profile. So the more automation you have, the more data you have on what's going on, the more flexible you can be, and the quicker you can give answers to people when they ask a particular question about your risk profile. And bringing that all together gives that portfolio view of non-financial risks. So themes in there are pointing towards that automation angle, and also the standardization and coordination that we've mentioned above. And then the purpose of the active risk management is really providing expertise in new and material risks. So things are changing, like we've said numerous times. How do the first line understand what that looks like? They look to the second line to bring in information in externally, particularly with a view to partnering with the business to enable safe change. So bring that information in, acting as a partner, getting people to understand their risk profiles ahead of changes, so that when changes are made, they're made in a way that doesn't jeopardize things in the future. And also something that we saw within the pandemic, particularly, is supporting crisis management and incident response. So one way of looking at this is trying to see how these two dual strategies of optimize and active apply to actually managing the risk. So we've got a fairly simple picture here. At the top, that green circle is supposed to represent a rapidly changing, complex, ambiguous threat. And we've said before, this is becoming more rapidly changing, more complex, and more ambiguous than before. So the status quo, which is the kind of traditional approach to operational risk management, would probably lag behind that risk profile. Things are done manually, periodically. By the time you've actually done your assessment, maybe things have moved on. So the red circle represents where you would be if you continued with the status quo and you didn't make any changes. So you'd probably be out of date permanently. Through optimization, which is the orange circle in the middle there, that allows you to keep up with that changing risk profile. So more use of data, better automation, better analytics means you can keep on top of that rapidly moving risk profile. And some of the methods you have to employ to be able to do that, as we've mentioned before, are becoming simpler, embedding more, so that you can actually collect that information in real time. So that allows you to keep on top of the risk profile, but really if you want to generate value and get ahead of things, that's where you become active. So the green circle at the bottom right indicates kind of getting ahead of the threat. So before changes have been made, you partner with the business, you understand the change itself, what that will mean for your operational risk profile, and consequently get ahead of that rapidly moving profile itself. So this is really one of the key themes from the report, is that optimization is kind of the bare minimum to be able to keep up in the new world, and active is really what you want to do to get ahead of the threat. The other interesting point really is that these aren't actually independent activities. They reinforce one another. So optimization reinforces active, active reinforces optimize. And I'll talk through that in a little bit of detail as it's set out on the slide. So there are kind of fairly straightforward reasons why optimize supports active. One is skills. So the more that you automate, the more that you reduce manual steps, that frees up resources within the second line, and actually kind of allows the skills to be focused more on active risk management. So it's really a purely kind of resource consequence of becoming more efficient in the second line. The second thing it does as well is it provides that really robust baseline of information. So the more optimization you have, the more real-time data you have, the more you can use that in an active setting. And thirdly, and this is an important point, by optimizing more, by reducing the burden on the first line, by embedding risk management into day-to-day activities, you can strengthen that partnership with the first line. So it kind of reinforces the relationship. The more that you optimize, the more the first line will be willing to be your partner in active risk management. So those are the ways that optimize kind of feed into active. Vice versa, active does reinforce optimize as well. The more you're involved in those change activities, the more you understand about the changing risk profile of your institution, and you can bring that back to kind of further optimize what you're doing. There's a trust element similar with the partnership going from optimized to active, but by adding value into the second line, so being contributing to that kind of value creation when the first line is changing things, that increases the trust, and it reinforces that relationship and the enhanced assurance that comes with that as well. And then thirdly, and this is actually a really crucial point as well, is that most of the technological innovation that we see is happening in the first line, and that's really because that's the revenue generating part of the institution. So if you're talking about AI or machine learning, that's all happening in the first line. But there's a huge opportunity for second line groups to leverage that. So by being in the room, by being involved in those projects, you can leverage what's going on in those kind of technological advances and bring them into that optimization strategy that you're adopting in the second line. So one of the key takeaways from the research was that although people may well have actually adopted optimization and active strategies independently, and actually some institutions may be doing optimize and others may be doing active, there is a huge reinforcing element to both of those. As I've mentioned, optimize feeds into active, active feeds into optimize, and they're not independent activities, and really together they work to generate that value in a very effective way. So what does this mean for the purpose of operational risk? If you roll back 20 years, the focus for operational risk was around regulatory capital, and it was used as the incentive to do good risk management. The world has moved on hugely since then for many of the reasons that we've outlined already. So we are looking towards writing down a new purpose for operational risk that will include things like changing safely, growing safely, providing resilient services, and also mitigating financial and reputational damage, but also crucially that value creation element as well. So look in the report for a full explanation of what we think the new purpose of operational risk and non-financial risk is. So what is the longer term outlook? As always, when you go into a piece of thought leadership like this, you collect lots of views that you have to collate and try and articulate a consistent vision with. So probably no institution is actually adopting all of the things that we have in this report, but in aggregate, it represents a kind of direction of travel for the industry. It does point towards a future where operational risk runs a well-optimized framework that keeps up with the pace of business change. That's the optimized piece. But also provides a baseline platform using the data that comes out of that exercise and expertise that the second line has to become far more active in the way that institutions change and grow, so they really understand the impact on their operational and non-financial risk profiles of making those changes, and they can be made in the most sensible way that creates the most value for their institutions. It's worth mentioning that really different institutions will probably have a different ambition for the endpoint. So some may focus more on optimization, others may really drive towards active risk management. And that really depends on the specific institution and also the appetite for that endpoint. That really means that the strategy will be different. It won't be the same for all institutions, but we think that kind of broad vision encompasses what most people are doing, and that endpoint is something to aim for, even if you never get that far. Thanks for taking the time to watch this webinar. If you do want to read the full report, and I would recommend it, please visit our website. The URL is there on the screen, and search for Right Time, and you should find it very easily. If you do have any questions on the conclusions, the content, anything about the report, then please do not hesitate to contact me. My email details are on the screen there. And once again, thanks for taking the time to watch the webinar, and I hope you enjoyed it.